Hello, my name's Catherine Carter, and I'm going to talk to you tonight about how I became interested in family history, and then I'm going to show you some sites that I used to be afraid of, but now really enjoy looking at because they help me to progress my family history. When I was 6 years old, my family joined the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. And because they didn't know very much about family history or genealogy, as it used to be called, my parents asked a missionary couple to help them do their research. And so that's what started them off on their journey. Later, my mum became really interested in genealogy and she became quite an expert. She used to teach it and local history at her local college. And I think it rubs off on you as a child. Also, in primary, we were encouraged to fill in this form. It's called My Personal History, and it's got my name on it, when I was baptized, who baptized me, way down to who I was sealed to, and I've crossed out husband or wife and put parents. So it says, in the London Temple on the 6th of December 1969. And then over the years, where it says important events, I've added different schools that I've been to. And because we moved every year, that list is quite long. I didn't particularly do any family history because my mum was so good at it. But in 2003, our first grandchild was born. And my heart began to listen to the messages that my head had been hearing for a long time about family history and doing our own. I could not see a way that I could do it that I could afford, because certificates are expensive, and so was a subscription to Ancestry. So I found a site called Genes Reunited, where everybody puts their interests on and you can contact people. And I had great success in finding my husband's family, which until then nobody had tackled their family history. And then we went to visit in 2005 our new daughter-in-law's family in Scotland. And when we were at church there, I overheard a sister say to somebody else, "You do know that Ancestry is free for church members now, don't you?" And that began my love affair with family history. I used to go to the Family History Centre because we didn't have internet at home, and spent a lot of time there researching, adding names for the temple. We'd never done that before. We'd always gone to the temple and done a temple name, which we were quite happy to do. But now we could do our own, and that was really exciting. So now I want to share with you some documents that I really like to use now, that I would never have used in the past because I didn't understand what they were for or what details they could give me. And the thing that ties all of these documents together is that they have a full date on them, either a marriage, a birth, or a death date, and in some cases, more than one of those. So the first place that you would find them, and I think we all know, is on certificates. And the problem with certificates is you've got to get the right one in the first place. So by having other documents that have the same birth date on them, or same death date or same marriage date, it can help you to tie your family tree and your research together so that you can be more and more sure that you've got the right person. We're going to have a look at a certificate of proclamation that's from Scotland, and I don't know if you know, but the General Register Office have deaths after 1985, and on those they have a full birth date. So you don't get a full death date, but you do get a full birth date. And that some christening or baptism records have a birth date on them as well as the christening or baptism date. And sometimes that is not indexed. So whenever you find a christening record that you can view, It's always worth going to have a look at to see if there is a birth date on it too. This is a certificate of proclamation from Scotland from 1825, and it says that Robert Ramsay and Anne Bannerman were married on the 22nd of July 1825. These are really interesting records. You don't have to be able to read all of it, just enough of it to make sense of it. The second thing is the 1939 register, absolutely marvellous. This was taken at the outbreak of the Second World War. It lists addresses, full names or middle names initialized, full dates of birth, and their occupation. There is no census in 1931 because it was bombed. They took it, but we don't have it. And because they'd done this enumeration of the population in 1939, they didn't do a 1941. So between the 1921, which we're hoping will be published next year, and 1951, this is what you go to. And this is usually a step that you go to going backwards on recent family history to help you go back a bit more. I'll show you in a moment. It has my dad and my grandparents on here, on the one I'm going to show you. It's helpful for finding people who were born after 1911 and you're not quite sure if they're you've got the right family, because they may be with their family. So it looks like this. It tells you the household name and where they live, Townhouse Road. So I know this is the right family because I have my dad's apprenticeship records that say he lives at 17 Townhouse Road. So there he is, Keith G. Hargreaves, and his date of birth, and he's at school because he's only 5. But there's his dad and his date of birth, and I can now match that date of birth up with his death date. And there's his mum and her birth date. And there's the handwritten copy. If the surname changes, it's usually crossed out and the new surname put in. And I'm really surprised that this isn't, because my grandparents were divorced and the granddad that I knew was called Pugh, Bill Pugh. Newspapers are wonderful, and you may find that in your relatives' effects there may be newspaper articles. There could be an announcement of a marriage, for instance. This is in 1856, in the Zion Chapel in Cone, of Mr. Hartley Lord of Marsden to Ellen Cork, who are my ancestors. And I found this marriage article on Family Search. Somebody else had found it and put it on as a memory. This is the death of Helen Beck, who was one of my Golding family. And this is in Canada. I never thought that I would have any family anywhere else but in England, or even in Cumbria, where she was from. And this is 1980. So if Find My Past, Ancestry, Family Search suggests somebody in a different country, have a look at it. See if the details match. Well worth looking at. It's interesting if nothing else. This was in an obituary, and it's for a little boy called Arthur Poucher of Timberland, who fell asleep on January the 17th, 1897. I love this. Lost to sight, but to our hearts still dear. They still remember him. This is the 5th anniversary of his death that they've put this in the paper. So, although the date, you'd think, oh, I don't need to look at something in 1902. This boy wasn't on the 1901 census. They're still remembering him. Well worth going to have a look at. School records. This is for a school in Chorley called St. Mary's Roman Catholic Church, and this is for somebody called Thomas Tracy, and it's got his birth date here, 1st of July 1875, and this is when he started at the school in 83, but it has his dad's name on it, and that's what I was missing when I was doing the research. He's Michael Tracy, and they live at Dole Lane, which is where the little theatre is. War service records are quite wonderful. It's lovely to see these typed indexed front sheets. This tells us that Patrick Jordan from Chorley died on the 6th of July 1918 in Egypt, and that he enlisted in Chorley and his regiment. But if you go to look further into this record, pages in, it tells you next of kin, Mary Ann of 24 Trafalgar Street, Chorley, and then all the children. It even has the particulars to the marriage and a marriage date and place. There are witnesses' names. They're not as much information as a certificate, but the army needed to see the certificate to fill this in. And the same with the details of their children. So it has all their names and dates of the children and where they were born. So what a wonderful thing, particularly for these children who wouldn't appear on the 1911 census, Agnes and Gerald. This was so that the family could get a pension, a war pension, because he's deceased. And the interesting thing is, he says he has no father. Well, he did have a father, but at this time his father was deceased. But mother of the soldier, Anne Jordan, and we get her address, 14 Waterloo Street. And Mary Ann at this time is at Water Street in Chorley. She makes all sorts of mistakes filling this in, but it doesn't matter because it gives us lots and lots of information. I like it when people make mistakes. We usually get more information. We don't have access to too many World War II records, but I found these Home Guard records for Burnley. And because a lot of my mum and dad's family are from that area, Colne and Nelson in particular, I thought I'd give these a try. Now, this is a recent discovery for me. And the family that I was looking at the time was Richard Hughes. And then it tells me his address, 24 Union Street, Briarfield. That matches his address in 1939. And then it tells me who his next of kin is Hannah Hughes, his wife. And then the next date is his birth date, 28th of August, 1895. I went looking for people who were on this record who lived in Colne, and there are 9 of them, but none of them were related to me. But when I changed the place to Nelson, there was more like 9 sheets of it. So really quite interesting. I'm sure there's something significant about that. Sometimes you have divorce papers and people think that there weren't many divorces until recently, and that's not quite true. It was an expensive process, but there are papers and they are online. This one is for James Willesey, and it's his wife who is trying to get the divorce. But the writing is quite nice on this one, and so I was able to read it. Sometimes the writing is quite appalling. And it says on the 16th day of February 1865, they were married at the parish church of Preston. And so now I've got a clue as to who she married, who she divorced, and the date. I've got a full date of marriage there. And then on the next page, it says, there was of our said marriage 1 child born on the 16th day of March, 1866. And unfortunately, that child died, and she doesn't name him, but by knowing his birth year and her surname from her marriage, you can then tie the 2 in and you can find this little family. Wills. Now, I always shied away from wills because some of them are extremely difficult to read. The writing is very old-fashioned. The terminology is too. And so I didn't like to look at them. But this one, some of it was typed and the extra writing in it is quite beautiful. So it says, on the 17th day of January 1872, the will with 1 codicil, William Golding, who is my dad's mother's side, of Cockermouth in the county of Cumberland, Clogger, all those clues as to who this man is to make sure he's the right one, died on the 2nd day of January 1872 at Cockermouth. So even though I haven't shown you the rest of the will, which is really good because he lists all his children's names and tells them what they're going to inherit, this actually gives me a full date of death. This is interesting because this is a typed one, and this is saying how much money she has and where it is. But it said, and that's why I like this one. And this one, although it's an inventory, it has the date she died, the 9th of January 1933. So useful. Not all of them are hard to read. So I encourage you to have a go at looking at them if you're offered that option. Probate records. Probate happens if you have a will. It goes to the probate office. They look at it and say, yes, everything's in order. They approve it. It goes on this list, and this list is then published. What's lovely about these, it says this is 1962, and these two Carters are on opposite sides of the page. So John Carter of 20 High Street, Sutton Courtenay. So we know that's the right Carter because Sutton Courtenay is a tiny place where Barry's family come from. Died on the 5th of June 1955 to Ormond Hazel Carter, his son, £190, 10 shillings. And then the other one is Lavinia Annie Carter of the same address, widow, died on the 8th of June 1955, I'm sorry, to Ormond Hazel, Uncle Pat. So I don't know why this took so long. They died in 1955, but the probate only came through in 1962. It could be that they didn't leave a will and it took a long time for it to be sorted. But just to die 3 days apart. Now, I found these more and more useful. This is the order of service for Barry's mum's funeral, and it has a birth date on it, 19th of December 1922, and her death date in December 2016. Tells you when she was buried and where. So that's 3 important dates on there. Not only that, but we have a nice photograph of her when she was 21. So I'm sure that a lot of us have been to a funeral of a family member, and these dates are there. We probably have them in our possession. And finally, gravestones. You've probably heard stories about families traipsing around graveyards trying to find gravestones that are pertinent to their family, and you've probably thought that it's quite a strange thing to do. But actually, it can be quite useful for finding full dates of birth and death. In this particular grave, it's in Colne. There's Mary Ann Hargreaves, died on a full date in 1878, and her son Thomas Hargreaves died in 1872. And then his wife, Ellen, born 13th of September 1833, and a full death date. When we phoned Nelson Council, they have the grave books, and they told us that there was also a Mary Elizabeth who died in 1864, but she's not mentioned on this front bit. Well, I really hope that you have enjoyed learning about some other resources that you may not have known about before. I hope that you will have the courage to try things that you've not looked at before. I wish you much joy in your service and success in your research. In the name of Jesus Christ. Amen.